The Manhattan skyline glittered like a jagged crown beyond the Ed Sullivan Theater on March 13, 2025, its lights slicing through a damp, late-winter fog that clung to Broadway's asphalt veins. Gary Oldman paced backstage, his scuffed boots scraping the worn floorboards where legends, Sinatra, Elvis, the Beatles, had once stood, their echoes long faded into the walls. At 66, he was a cinematic shapeshifter, Sid Vicious's punk snarl, Dracula's velvet menace, Churchill's gruff resolve, all distilled into a wiry frame and gray eyes that flickered with the South London boy's restless mischief. Tonight, he'd trade barbs with Stephen Colbert on The Late Show, a verbal sparring match he'd always savored, but as he tugged at the cuffs of his weathered leather jacket, a stagehand, a wiry kid with a mop of red hair, slipped him a folded note, its edges creased, ink bleeding like a fresh wound. "Say the word at midnight, or the real burns." Gary's pulse jolted, a cold prickle racing up his spine. The word, nil by mouth, his 1997 gut-wrenching masterpiece, had unleashed 428 F-bombs, a record he wore like a battered crown, but this cryptic threat reeked of something deeper, a secret coiled in the raw script he'd poured his soul into decades ago. As the audience's muffled roar seeped through the curtain, Gary clutched the note, his palms slick with sweat. CBS had its prissy rules, sure, but someone was scripting a game he hadn't rehearsed, and by dawn he'd either unmask the shadowy bastard or watch his past erupt in flames that no bleep could silence. Gary Oldman's life was a jagged mosaic of reinvention, each piece chipped from the rough stone of his beginnings. Born in New Cross, London, in 1958, he'd grown up in a council flat shadowed by his father's boozy rages and his mother's quiet endurance, a seamstress who'd stitched love into every meal despite the cracks. School was a blur. The stage was his escape. By 20, he'd clawed into the Royal Court Theater, his raw talent a Molotov cocktail of rage and grace. Films followed, Sid and Nancy in '86, where he'd lost himself in punk's chaos, JFK in '91, a fleeting Oswald, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy in 2011, where Smiley's stillness won him an Oscar nod. Then Darkest Hour in 2017, Churchill's bulldog grit finally landing him the gold at 59. But Nil by Mouth was different, a semi-autobiographical howl he'd written and directed, a bruise of a film about addiction, violence, and the families it shattered. Shot in 1996 on a shoestring, it premiered in '97 to BAFTAs and gasps, its 428 F-words a defiant middle finger to polished cinema. It was Gary's soul on celluloid, a mirror to his father's ghost, and it left scars he'd buried under sobriety, 28 years clean, and a fifth child with his third wife, Giselle Schmidt, a calm harbor after decades of storms. Stephen Colbert was a different breed, a foil forged in a different fire. At 60, the Charleston-born comedian had risen from improv stages to The Daily Show's sardonic edge, then claimed The Late Show in 2015, turning it into a late-night beacon with Catholic wit and a knack for disarming guests. Gary admired him, Stephen's quicksilver mind, his ability to dance between levity and depth. They'd crossed paths before, a 2018 bit about Darkest Hour, a 2022 Slow Horses plug where Gary's dry quips had Stephen in stitches. Tonight was another round. Promote Slow Horses Season 5, Apple TV's gritty spy saga where Gary's Jackson Lamb was a foul-mouthed anti-hero, a nod to Neil's spirit. But the note shifted the script. The real burns. What real? Neil's negative rested in the BFI archive in London, or so he'd thought. Whispers of bootlegs, lost cuts, had floated in industry pubs, but this felt personal, a dagger aimed at his chest. As the stage manager barked, "5 minutes, Mr. Oldman," Gary shoved the note into his pocket, his mind a tangle of questions. Someone knew something he didn't, and they'd chosen this night, this hallowed stage, to pull the pin. The green room offered no respite. Gary sank into a cracked leather chair, the hum of the crew outside a dull roar. He fished out the note again, studying its scrawl, slanted, frantic, like it was written in a rush. Say the word at midnight. Which word? Neil's profanity was a symphony. Fuck, cunt, bastard. But one stood tallest, the F word he'd wielded like a sledgehammer. Was that it? He pictured the film's opening. Ray Winston's snarling Ray, Kathy Burke's battered Val, a South London flat thick with despair. He'd shot it in a haze of memory. His father's voice in every shout, his mother's silence in every pause. The director's cut, 2 hours of unfiltered pain, had been axed for release. Too brutal even for art house guts. He'd ordered it burned, or so he'd thought. Had someone salvaged it? The stagehand's face flashed, too nervous, too quick to vanish. Gary's gut churned. He needed air, but the clock mocked him. 8:45 p.m. Showtime loomed. The taping unfolded like a well-rehearsed play, the audience a live wire of energy. Stephen, in his crisp navy suit, strode out to applause, his monologue a razor-sharp riff on Trump's latest inauguration gaffes. And now, a man who needs no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway, Gary Oldman. The crowd erupted as Gary emerged, all lean charisma and sly grin, settling into the guest chair with a casual slump. Gary, huge fan, Stephen said, eyes twinkling. No, thank you, Stephen, Gary replied, his gravelly timbre cutting through the cheers. Stephen waved the CBS letter, a mock-serious prop. Before we start, the network sent me this, very familiar with your vigorous use of salty talk. Nil by mouth, 428 F-words, a record. Gary leaned in, deadpan. I'm very bleepin' proud of that. Laughter roared, Stephen's cackle leading the charge. The bit danced on. Stephen read the forbidden list, arse, mother bleep, pausing at dick. You can say that, oddly, just not anatomically. Gary's brow arched, a smirk tugging. So I can call you a dick, but not mean you're... Exactly, Stephen cut in, gleeful. Ridiculous, Gary muttered. Some dick with a tiny... The bleep sliced him off, the crowd howling. Stephen steered to slow horses, Gary riffing on Lamb's stench and swagger, but the note gnawed at him, a splinter under his skin. He kept the charm up. Years of masks made it easy, but his eyes darted to the wings, searching for the red-headed stagehand. Gone. Post-taping, the studio buzzed down. Stephen clapped Gary's shoulder backstage. You're a riot, mate. Drinks at O'Malley's? Gary forced a grin. Rain check. I've got a thing. Stephen nodded, oblivious, and headed out, his team trailing. The theater emptied, staff shuffling props, but Gary lingered. The note, a lead weight. 11:30 p.m. Midnight. The stage felt alive, its boards creaking under unseen feet. He'd played detectives, Smiley's quiet hunt, Gordon's gruff justice, but this was no role. He scanned the wings, then spotted it. A trapdoor, flush with the floor, a faint scratch mark betraying recent use. Heart hammering, he knelt, pried it open with a penknife from his pocket, and peered into a black maw. A rusted ladder descended into shadow. Neil's ghosts were calling, and Gary Oldman never backed down from a bloody fight. The ladder groaned under his weight, each rung a cold bite against his palms. He dropped into a basement, air thick with dust and mildew, the faint drip of water echoing somewhere deep. A single bulb dangled, flickering like a dying star, casting jagged shadows over crates, old props, a top hat, a warped guitar, relics of Ed Sullivan's golden age. At the room's center stood a table, rough-hewn and scarred, a 35mm film canister atop it, labeled in faded marker, Nil by mouth, director's cut. Beside it, a Zippo lighter and a matchbox, the threat made flesh. Gary's gut twisted. His first edit, 2 hours of unseen agony, trimmed for release. He'd thought it ash in a London incinerator. A spool of film peeked from the canister, its celluloid edge curling like a beckoning finger. He reached for it, then froze. A shadow shifted in the corner. A figure stepped into the light, tall, wiry, 50s, in a CBS janitor's jumpsuit, his face weathered, eyes sharp as broken glass. "You're early, Oldman," he rasped, voice thick with South London grit. Gary's jaw tightened. "Who the fuck are you?" The man smirked, revealing stained teeth. "Ray Carter. Sound op on nil. You don't remember me, do you?" Memory clicked. Ray, the boom guy from '96, a quiet drunk Gary'd sacked mid-shoot after he'd botched a take, slurring through a scene. "You've got my film," Gary said, voice low, dangerous. Ray's smirk widened. "Your soul, mate. This cut's the real deal. Your dad's fists, your mum's tears. Kept it when you kicked me out. Been waiting 28 years. Gary's fists clenched, nails biting skin. "For what?" "Revenge," Ray spat, stepping closer, his breath sour with cheap gin. "You got Oscars, big house, posh life. I got nothing, no credits, no gigs, just this." He tapped the canister. "Tonight, you say the word, the real word, or I torch it. Your call." The clock on the wall ticked. 11:58 p.m. Gary's mind raced. 428 F-bombs, but Ray meant one. The rawest, the one CBS bleeped most, the one that defined Neil's fury. Say it, or lose a piece of himself forever. He thought of the film's heart. Ray Winston's snarling Ray, a mirror to his father, Kathy Burke's Val, his mother's Echo, the South London flat where he'd filmed his own wounds. That cut was unvarnished truth, too brutal for the world. Ray struck a match, flame dancing an inch from the reel. 10 seconds, Oldman. Gary's past surged. New cross nights, his father's belt. His mother's whispered, "It'll be all right." He'd poured it into Neil, a scream no one fully heard. 5, Ray counted, eyes gleaming. Gary met his stare, steel for steel. "Fuck," he said, loud, clear, unbleeped. The word a cannon shot in the damp air. Ray froze, match hovering, the flame trembling. "That's it," he croaked. "That's it," Gary growled, stepping forward. "Burn it, and I'll bury you." Ray's smirk faltered. The flame licked the canister's edge, singeing it. Then Gary lunged, knocking it free. The match hit the floor, sparking, but Gary stomped it out, pinning Ray against the table, forearm to throat. "You're done, mate," Ray thrashed, cursing, but Gary held firm, years of bottled rage fueling his grip. Footsteps clattered above. Security, alerted by a stagehand who'd seen the trap door ajar. Sirens wailed outside, blue lights flashing through a high window. "You'll regret this," Ray hissed as 2 guards hauled him up, cuffing him, his rants fading down the hall. "It's mine, mine." By 1 a.m., the basement was silent. Gary, alone with the reel. He sank onto a crate, popped the canister, threading a strip through his fingers. Frames flickered under the bulb, Winstone's snarl, Burke's haunted eyes, a young Gary Oldman directing in a haze of smoke and fury. The director's cut, his unfiltered soul. He sat there till 2 a.m., weighing it. Screen it at a festival. Sell it to a collector, or let it rest. The note crinkled in his pocket. Ray's last jab, a petty ghost. Dawn crept over Manhattan, gray light seeping through the window as Gary locked the canister in a prop safe backstage, unburned but unseen. He'd decide later, maybe never. Stephen called at noon, voice chipper. "Heard you had a wild night. Everything okay?" Gary chuckled, hoarse. "Just another bleepin' story, mate. Tell CBS they owe me a pint." Stephen laughed, clueless, and hung up. Back home in his Tribeca loft, Gary poured a tea, Earl Grey, no whiskey, and watched the city wake. Ray was in custody, charged with extortion, the real safe. But questions lingered. Had Ray acted alone? The stagehand, red hair, nervous eyes, had vanished, untraceable. A loose thread. Gary sipped, staring at the safe's key on his counter. Neil's ghosts weren't done with him, but he'd faced them, again, and walked away. For your 50+, it's a nostalgic nod to Oldman's gritty past, a tale of resilience against buried demons, and a cliffhanger. What's on that reel, and who else knows? They'll stay to find out. One word defied the dark. This tale proves that grit outlasts every ghost. If Gary's fight grabbed you, drop a like to shout it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that cut through the bleeps. What would you risk to face your past? Share your fire in the comments below. We're all ears. Until next time, keep this close. True legends never fade off screen.